freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. We didn't pass it on to our children in the bloodstream. The only way they can inherit the freedom we have known is if we fight for it, protect it, defend it, and then hand it to them with the well-taught lessons of how they in their lifetime must do the same. And if you and I don't do this, then you and I may well spend our sunset years telling our children and our children's children what it once was like in America when men were free.
The 40th President of the United States, Ronald Reagan, began his political career as the president of the Screen Actors Guild and later as a spokesman for General Electric. Reagan had been a radio announcer and actor since 1932. He called Chicago Cubs baseball games for the WHO station in Des Moines, Iowa, and while traveling with the ball club in California, Reagan took a screen test, which led to a 7-year contract with Warner Brothers. His early years in the movie business were spent in the B-picture unit, where Reagan later remarked, "They didn't want the films to be good, they wanted them by Thursday." During World War II, Reagan served with the 1st Motion Picture Unit, where his command of the unit indirectly led to the discovery of Marilyn Monroe.
For General Electric, here is Ronald Reagan. Good evening.
As part of his work as the host of General TV Playhouse the year, sometimes giving as many as 14 speeches in one day. Ostensibly a spokesman for GE, the initially Democratic Reagan began to shift his political leanings toward the conservative during his tenure with the company. In 1966, Reagan successfully ran for governor of California and was re-elected for a 2nd term in 1970. He unsuccessfully campaigned for the Republican nomination for president in 1968 and 1976, but eventually won that spot and beat incumbent Jimmy Carter in 1980. Reagan's terms in office are known for their sweeping economic reform initiatives. Reaganomics advocated reducing tax rates to spur economic growth, controlling the money supply to reduce inflation, and deregulation of the economy and reducing government spending. While his first term was spent in a nuclear arms race with the USSR, Reagan later negotiated with Soviet General Secretary Mikhail Gorbachev to decrease both countries' nuclear weapons supply. He remained supportive of anti-communist sentiment and movements the world over and worked towards ending the Cold War. The Iran-Contra scandal blemished Reagan's 2nd term as secret trade agreements with Iran had been carried out. The intent was to free hostages from Iran in exchange for the sale of munitions. Iran, at that time, was subject to an arms embargo, and the money made from the sale by the U.S. government was to be diverted into funds to help the CIA assist rebel groups in Nicaragua to overthrow their government. This practice had been prohibited by Congress, and soon investigations indicted 14 of Reagan's administration. Evidence suggests, however, that Reagan was unaware of the illegal dealings. Reagan finished his 2nd term in 1989. 5 years later, he announced that he had been diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease and passed away at age 93 on June 5, 2004. Ronald Reagan's platforms and ideals in regards to politics and economics have been credited with reshaping the thinking processes of the American political right. The United States' 41st president, George Herbert Walker Bush, was inaugurated on January 20th, 1989. Bush was a World War II veteran who, at the age of 18, postponed college to serve as an aviator in the U.S. Navy, the youngest to serve at that time. His service in the war earned Bush the Distinguished Flying Cross, 3 Air Medals, and a Presidential Unit Citation for serving on the USS San Jacinto. Born in Milton, Massachusetts, to Senator Prescott Bush and Dorothy Walker Bush, George Bush moved his family to West Texas after the war and his accelerated graduation from Yale University. Bush entered the oil industry and became a millionaire by the age of 40. In the 1970s, Bush served as the ambassador to the United Nations, chairman of the Republican National Committee, chief of the liaison office to the People's Republic of China, and the director of the Central Intelligence Agency. Bush then served as the vice president for Ronald Reagan after losing the presidential nomination in 1980. He soon succeeded Reagan as the latter president's second term came to a close. While his campaign promise not to raise taxes was soon broken, Bush entered the White House during a time of profound world change.
I come before you and assume the presidency at a moment rich with promise. We live in a peaceful, prosperous time, but we can make it better. For a new breeze is blowing, and a world refreshed by freedom seems reborn. For in man's heart, if not in fact, the day of the dictator is over. The totalitarian era is passing. Its old ideas blown away like leaves from an ancient, lifeless tree. A new breeze is blowing, and a nation, refreshed by freedom, stands ready to push on. There's new ground to be broken and new action to be taken.
On November 9th, 1989, less than a year after Bush had entered office, the Berlin Wall, a staunch symbol of the Iron Curtain and the Cold War, began to fall. East and West Germany reunited, and the wall was officially removed the following year. Bush's presidency was one driven by foreign policy, as the fall of the Berlin Wall was soon followed by the dissolution of the Soviet Union 2 years later. From August of 1990 to February of 1991, the United States became embroiled in a war with Iraq over that country's invasion of Kuwait, its much smaller neighbor to the south. The act was immediately condemned by the United Nations Security Council, and President Bush deployed U.S. forces into Saudi Arabia, and together with other coalition forces, succeeded in halting the Iraqi advance into Kuwait and drove them back into Iraq. Even with the victory in the Middle East, many still argue that the UN terms of ceasefire led the United States back into war with Iraq in 2003. And with the end of communism and the Cold War, the American people felt betrayed by the no new taxes promise having been ignored. When the raised taxes then also failed to stimulate the dragging economy, Bush's political fate was sealed. In 1992, George H.W. Bush lost his bid for re-election to a former governor from Arkansas.
Thanks for watching. If you'd like to help us produce more compelling historical content like this, please like, comment below, and share this video with fellow history buffs. And of course, be sure to subscribe to help keep history happening.